The Cape government plans to grow the local economy by supporting entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry. Now, this decision comes amid calls for government to refine legislation on cannabis licensing. Some experts believe the sector offers untapped opportunities to create jobs. One of them is Chief Economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, Wandile Sihlobo, who joins us now live via our Skype line for a discussion. Mr. Sihlobo, this discussion comes at such an incredibly important time. We're talking about our economy being in the doldrums, that's putting it mildly. And so many countries, so many African countries are looking at cannabis as offering prospects for boosting especially rural economic growth. Are we one of those countries?
No, I think we are one of those countries, and this is an important industry. I mean, if you look at its value globally, it's worth now around about $150 billion, and it's projected by Barclays to actually be able to reach around about $270 billion in the next 2 decades or so. So South Africa, having had a history of, there are anecdotal evidence that some parts, particularly in the province that you pointed out, Eastern Cape, this plant has been grown in the shadows of the law. And I think now beginning to think about to say what will be the clear legislative framework and not only grow it for recreational, which has been dominant, but rather explore some of the opportunities either on the industrial side or either on the medical side, because those investments or those initiatives would themselves bring jobs, so that we're not only looking at employment within the production of the plant, but rather more on the value chain side, and also obviously look at globally to say on the consumption side, what is actually happening? Where are people demanding this? And I think South Africa is beginning to catch up on this, but we are far behind some of the other African countries which have already started to make some inroads in this.
So just for clarity's sake, we now have that decision by the Constitutional Court that allows us to use, possess or grow cannabis, but that's for private, personal consumption. That's now no longer a criminal offence. In terms of this cannabis industry that we are seeing burgeoning in the country, we're seeing CBD oil and other such products as well. How does that fit into the legislative framework?
No, I mean, look, growing on cannabis, it's still, cannabis, looking at it as dacha, is still a drug. So it has not yet been reclassified to be an agricultural plant where anyone can grow under, obviously, certain regulations. So that's one of the things that still need to be done. The ruling of last year, September, is, as you have explained, that is for private use. Now, the people who are participating in the value chain of this plant, particularly those on the medicinal ones, they have to go through certain rigorous licenses, which are somewhat costly. The numbers vary, but as far as I can tell, I think they are somewhere around about 300,000 that someone needs to have, and obviously follow through a certain process to be able to achieve this. But for me, my viewpoint is that seeing the Eastern Cape now, for example, trying to make inroads on advancing the investment and thinking about this on that particular province, it might be a good thing for bringing on awareness of the industry, but we do need to have coherence as the country, not to have certain provinces moving way ahead than the other one, to be able to set a clear policy framework to say, okay, under what conditions can this be grown, and what should the licensing regime be, and also look at the costing and not have it costing as it costs now, the number that I mentioned of 300,000 rand, somewhere around about those range, so that you can be able to also make sure that there is inclusion, some of the small farmers who might not have that such capital to actually get in on this market, but obviously also clarifies the rules of the game on under what conditions should it be grown, because some people might abuse the plant and there might be unintended consequences of that.
I mean, that I suppose would be one of the biggest concerns when it comes to the cannabis industry, that it might be open to exploitation for more dodgy means and not just as a boost for the economy and a creator of jobs.
Yeah, I mean, even now, we've seen cases, if you talk to the police, of people that are abusing this plant. But now the question should be to say globally, what are people doing what are people demanding, and how is South Africa positioning itself in there. And I think in the growth of the demand, particularly if you look on the industrial side where it involves textile, and also particularly on the medicinal side where there seems to be a boom, the key thing is to say what should the legislation look like, and also under what conditions should the issuance of the license be, so that we make sure that at least we participate on those. If you look at China, for example, last year where they've liberalized their hemp production, they were able to have an industry worth of about $1.2 billion worth of industry. And now the question is to Africa, where is and Limpopo, who seem to have some good climate, who can be able to produce some of this crop. Why don't we focus there and refine our legislative work and see that, okay, when investment flow in, there is a good collaboration with the farmers in those areas, and then we begin to think about rural economic growth and job creation that we so badly need. It's about setting the rules right and be able to accommodate so that we can be able to achieve all of the good things that we need economically out of this crop.
Yeah, absolutely. Such a fascinating conversation, and cannabis truly does present quite an interesting, one of the interesting solutions, at least, to the situation our economy finds itself in. Thanks very much for your analysis of the story. Chief Economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, Wandile Sihlobo, joining us there via our Skype line.